Greetings and welcome to Gripping Horror. In the small town of Southeast, nestled within Putnam County, New York, exists a flooded pit that plunges an astonishing 600 feet into the earth. This well-kept secret amongst divers has a history of both individuals and items vanishing into its depths, never to re-emerge. Located on private property, the current owners have no interest in diving, nor wish the liability of having divers on site. Beyond its tranquil facade lies the tragic tale of experienced technical diver Bob Thomas, whose momentary lapse in judgment led to a fatal outcome in its unforgiving depths. This is the Tilly Foster cave diving disaster of 2017. Meet 48-year-old Bob Thomas from Jersey City. Always one for adventure, he joined the Navy in 1987 and served until 1993. Following his service, Bob pursued higher education and obtained his master's degree from the University of Buffalo. His professional journey led him to the field of IT, where he'd been thriving ever since, most recently working as an enterprise architect for Major League Baseball in New York City. Outside of work, Bob's life had been enriched with remarkable achievements. He's scaled mountain summits, indulged in rock climbing for years, and for the past 15 years, he'd been a very active scuba diver, achieving the rank of Master Scuba Diver. In 2013, experienced diver Dan Wright was notified of a deep flooded mine near Brewster, New York. The intrigue being too much to bear, Dan found himself compelled to persuade the owners to allow him and a team, which included Bob, to explore the mine, map it out, and provide legally binding waivers to release them from exposure to lawsuits in the case of a diver injury. It took some time, but by spring of 2014, the team was granted permission. Upon the first survey of the site, they found it was more picturesque than any of the images sent to them or internet searches. Very large, 300 feet by 400 feet across, it looked like a small lake, with sheer cliffs and surrounded by foliage. Apparently, there was a diving academy of some sort at one time from the 1980s to the 1990s, evident from the sturdy steel stairwell and steel dive platform on pontoons, still in great shape. The mine waters were spring-fed, and with some flow. Where it flows to was yet unknown. It is the deepest dive site in the tri-state area outside of the ocean. From the jump, it drops 177 feet right off the platform, meaning there is no shallow end. The mine was not merely a deep terraced hole. There were multiple horizontal tunnels of drifts, as miners call them, starting at 300 feet. Some go hundreds of feet until the tunnel played out, others for a short distance. These passageways were meticulously carved out during the late 1870s to the 1880s, a period that coincided with the latter stages of the mining operations. The mine was named for Tilly Foster, who bought the land that the mine was on from George Beale. After Foster's death in 1842, the property passed through several hands before it came into the possession of Harvey Iron and Steel Company. The mine opened in 1853 and employed large numbers of Irish and Italian immigrants. Workers were known by numbers rather than names, because the names of immigrants were considered too difficult to pronounce. The mine reached its peak of production in the 1870s. It was 600 feet, or 180 meters deep. There were 300 miners employed, and they were producing 7,000 tons of ore per month. From 1887 to 1889, the mine was made into an open pit, a process which took 2 years. At one time, it was the largest open pit operation in the world. In 1895, there was a major collapse that killed 13 miners. The mine was closed due to financial difficulties in 1897, all equipment removed and sold off. From this point on in the mine's history, things start to become intriguing. After the collapse, it was flooded by a reservoir nearby. The mine was used as a dump for a couple of towns from 1920 to the 1940s. You name it, it was tossed in. Cars, trucks, building materials, tractors, and more. In the 1940s, the Navy was testing sonar equipment there. Owners changed, and the property was closed off to dumping around World War II. The site was known as a body dumping ground for the mob for nearly 50 years, according to reports. One witness still alive today watched a body thrown in the mine in 1938. Other known victims were tossed in during the 1950s and as late as 1995. Routinely, stolen cars were driven into the mine after being stripped. One such vehicle, stolen in 1990, had a stolen safe in the trunk, according to police, never to be located. Miners in the day had called this place King of Shadows because of the massive deaths during mining. Locals persisted calling it that, as nothing thrown in was ever found again. No police search had ever produced anything. On November the 19th, 2017, following 4 years of the mine's exploration with finds such as the 1988 Monte Carlo, the team reached the site to commence a sequence of exploratory dives for Robin Murphy, a female murdered in 1995 at the age of 17 and dumped in the mine. Finding a needle in a haystack would be a more accurate description than a search, as years of leaves and sediment would now be covering her body. The team mapped the locations where the murderer might have disposed of a weighted body. They planned to carry out dives along the southern and western walls as a starting point. On this occasion, Bob opted to dive without a buddy and entered the mine alone around 12 p.m. Before he entered, he had low gas supply onset and no reserve in case of emergency. Bob dropped his deep bailout tank before even starting the dive and elected to dive without this critical gas reserve, leaving him with no means of dealing with gas emergencies that might arise during the dive. Bob dove to a depth of 171 feet to the bottom of the flooded mine shaft. The temperature starts to warm on the surface, reaching up to 70 degrees. Only 10 feet down, it changes very quickly. Below 40 feet, it is a chilling 42 degrees, all the way to the bottom. The water contains a significant amount of particulate matter, so much so that it's lights out around 80 feet. Below 125 feet, the water clears up with very good visibility, but according to Dan Wright, it's as black as he has ever seen, darker than a cave, as there is no wall for your light to bounce off of if you are in the middle of the site. It is not for the faint of heart. Given the frigid water temperature, Bob required a heated wetsuit to endure the conditions. The cold would have been intolerable otherwise. However, the suit's battery could only sustain the heating for approximately 90 minutes. Amid the chilling temperatures and unsettling darkness, Bob became disorientated underwater. His dive quickly spiraled into a disaster, and he became entangled in a mass of wires and cables. Bob wasn't just trapped, he was severely jammed within the wires and cables. Bob ran out of air at 12:34 p.m, or very close to this, as analysed from his shearwater dive computer, which takes a sample as saves every 10 seconds. His fellow team member, Dan Wright, started his dive at 1 p.m. and was exploring some distance to where Bob was at around 200 feet. He had no idea that Bob was in some terrible situation or dead at this point. By the time he surfaced at 2 p.m, Bob was long gone. Bob's girlfriend called the sheriff's office around 3:50 p.m. and asked police to check on him because he was late for a party at her house. Police went to the mine and found the team members, who said that Bob was late surfacing from his dive, given his air supply. When questioned by the police about not calling 911, Dan Wright explained that he and the group had intended to return the following morning with additional equipment to search for Bob in the water. Dan then asked if Monica Runswald, who was present on site, along with another male named John Morgan, and himself could depart. State police divers in collaboration with Brewster and Mahopac Falls fire departments, initiated a search of the mine. They employed sonar equipment to aid in locating Bob. Tragically, his body was located and retrieved around 1 p.m. on the day following his disappearance. State police divers skillfully used a cable extended from the surface to lift Bob's body from the water, concluding the search operation. In July 2018, the Putnam County Sheriff's Department officially closed the case, attributing it to a tragic accident. Subsequently, in September 2018, a stone memorial marker was engraved and erected by some of the dedicated members of the exploration project as a tribute to Bob. May Bob rest in peace. He is remembered as an upbeat man whose passion was helping people and diving. A few dedicated men continue in the diving of the deep flooded mine to this day, but many do just a single dive and never return. This has been gripping horror. I hope to see you in the next one.